Hi, everyone. My name is Sunil Iyengar. I'm the Director of the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. I'm wearing a blue sports jacket, blue shirt, and I've got glasses, and I'm middle-aged and have black and grayish hair. So thank you for joining us today as we announce a new online resource for federal statistics and evidence reporting about the arts on our website at arts.gov. The resource we're talking about is called the National Arts Statistics and Evidence Reporting Center, or NASERC, and we will rely on it increasingly to monitor and report various aspects of health and vitality of the U.S. arts ecosystem. Next slide. So in addition to announcing this resource, we wanted to take this opportunity to celebrate, if you will, the role and importance of data and evidence, not only within the arts, but also for decision makers across government, academia, and the nonprofit or private sector. But first, we'll hear from the NEA Chair, Dr. Maria Rosario-Jackson, who will position this resource, NASERC, in the broader context of the NEA's work today. We'll then hear from my colleague in the NEA's research office, Patricia Mullaney-Loss, as she gives you a demo of the resource, and particularly a series of arts indicators that constitute NASERC's first product offerings. And then we'll have a chat with two sets of panelists. The first panel will engage U.S. government officials, but also those outside government who monitor and use statistics and research flowing from federal data collections. I'll ask these panelists to bring their own fields of expertise to consider how a resource like NASERC can be helpful to them and to the wider public. After a short break, we'll hear from another panel, this one composed of arts and cultural researchers and/or users of arts research from philanthropy, consulting, and arts organizations. We'll consider access and use of empirical insights about the arts and how the utility of arts data and data tools can be optimized. And then I'll close things out with a few remarks. So first, next slide, please. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the NEA Chair, Dr. Jackson.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Sunil. I'm delighted to join you as we launch the NEA's NASERC initiative and the Arts and Indicators project within that. For the better part of 30 years, my work is focused at the intersection of arts and culture and comprehensive community uplift. As someone trained in public policy, community development, urban planning, a lot of my career has been across fields, working to better understand and advance the connections between the arts and communities. I'm certain that none of the things that we say we aspire to as a nation of opportunity and justice are possible without the intentional integration of arts, culture, and design into all facets of our lives and the systems that we rely on to care for each other. I also know that whether in government, philanthropy, or academia, as researchers, writers, educators, policymakers, program designers, and administrators, access to accurate and high-quality data about the cultural sector and its contributions to our society is critical to good work that helps communities thrive. This understanding helps to shape how the NEA is showing up. While we're a funder, and that's how we're primarily known, we're also leaning increasingly into our role as a national resource that contributes to the arts sector and to building communities where people can thrive. As we continue to lean into our capacity as a national resource, we're being intentional about our roles as a connector, convener, catalyst, using our national perch and perspective and reinforcing our ability to commission and conduct research about the roles of the arts in our society. On January 30th, the NEA co-hosted a national summit on the roles of arts and culture in our communities with the White House Domestic Policy Council. We convened artists and arts professionals, healthcare workers, philanthropy, and federal, state, and local government officials representing agencies overseeing infrastructure, health and human services, climate change, disaster response, education, and much more. The summit illustrated that at their best, the arts don't exist in a silo, and unleashing the full power of the arts requires thoughtful and intentional integration of the arts across sectors. Today's announcement of NASERC and its first product, an Arts Indicators Initiative, is so exciting. This work has the potential to create immense value for the field and beyond. By analyzing and reporting regularly on key metrics across a large array of public data sources, the NASERC Arts Indicators Project will place important tools in the hands of policymakers, practitioners, and the public. NASERC and its output will help enable others to arrive at new solutions to challenges facing the arts sector and society as a whole. As we look to the future, the NEA remains committed to investing in research on the value and impact of the arts. We're committed to continuing to expand this resource, to identifying areas of special focus, and to the intersection of the arts with other fields. It's important to note that this resource is made possible by our longstanding research and data partnerships with other federal agencies, notably the U.S. Census Bureau and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. BA Director Vipin Arora, we are so grateful to you for your participation at this launch. Supporting the bonds between our agencies and those between the arts and more traditionally data-centric entities is essential. Recently, I spoke with U.S. Census Director Rob Santos on the NEA's Quick Study podcast about the roles of the arts and the social sciences in our society. And after discussing the importance of tracking arts participation and engagement, he stated a really profound truth. He said that when you mix the arts alongside all the other types of services and resources we provide and track, we as government arrive at the more holistic picture that we need to better understand and serve our country. It's my hope that this resource is a positive step towards equipping us to better serve our constituencies, our communities, and our country. Thank you for listening. I'll hand it over to Patricia Mullaney-Loss.
Thank you very much, Chair Jackson. I'm going to share my screen again. Great. So, hello everybody, I'm Patricia Mullaney-Loss. I'm a social science analyst in the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. I am a 30-something female with dark curly hair that is not so gradually getting whiter and whiter, and I have a dark red top on. Our office, ORA for short, supports and oversees research about the arts ecosystem and about the arts' measurable benefits for individuals and communities. We also conduct program evaluations, and we work with our colleagues to instill a culture of learning throughout the agency. Apart from our own grant making in support of research and any special studies we commission or conduct, our office works closely with other researchers across government to strengthen the federal data infrastructure for arts and culture. We do this by partnering with agencies such as the U.S. Census Bureau, which you've already heard. For decades, the U.S. Census Bureau has assisted us with the collection of household data about arts participation. We have also relied on Census and the Bureau of Labor Statistics for data and analyses about artists in the workforce. Just last week, we released new data from our partnership with the Bureau of Economic Analysis, measuring the contributions of arts industries to national and state level economies. And we're currently working with the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics to track arts participation and arts education in a longitudinal study sample of high schoolers. These are just a few examples. There are many more. And we're always on the lookout for opportunities to embed arts-related questions in other federal data collections. When doing so can both help the NEA and its partners meet their missions effectively. Of course, such efforts are worthwhile only if there exists a clear and publicly recognizable point of access for the analysis and reporting of these data. Just to underscore, the NEA has always issued periodic reports and briefs that rely on federal data sources, but today we are announcing a new online hub that will organize the data into key metrics and tools that can be accessed on a frequently updated basis. This resource, the National Arts Statistics and Evidence-Based Reporting Center, or NASERC, will harness available national level data sets with the goal of providing regular, scheduled updates on a variety of indicators on arts and cultural topics. Importantly, it will track how these indicators fare over time. In the future, NASERC will also go beyond analyzing federal data sources to produce topical reports, practitioner guides, field scans, and literature reviews to support the work of policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and of course, to inform the general public. We are very grateful to be working with a team of experts from the American Institutes of Research on this project. The team includes Jim Lindsay, Principal Researcher, Thomas Snyder, Managing Director, Ashley Roberts, Senior Researcher, Damon Blair, Research Assistant, Londa Springler, Senior Project Specialist. This team reviewed over 40 federal data sets, created the NASERC Arts Indicators Framework, developed in-depth analytic reports for each indicator, and are currently pursuing new indicators to add to NASERC in the future. We thank them for bringing their considerable analytic capacity, experience, knowledge, and flexibility to this endeavor. NASERC has also been guided by a technical working group comprised of arts and cultural researchers, leaders, and practitioners. This group has provided guidance on the indicators framework and the forthcoming topical reports, whether it be questioning analytic methods, providing additional information or resources, or adding nuance to our understanding of an arts and cultural topic. We thank them for their generous advice and commitment to furthering the arts and cultural research field. These leaders will continue to provide input into this project as it grows, and we expect to recruit and engage new TWG members in the future as current members cycle off. Now let's get into what is actually within NASERC and the Arts Indicators Framework. At present, we have organized arts indicators under 4 domains: artists and other cultural workers, which describes employment within the arts and supporting arts industries; arts participants, which describes the types of arts activities individuals pursue and their time use and spending habits; arts and cultural assets, which describes the economic impact of the arts, as well as arts funding and infrastructure; and lastly, arts education, which describes arts in schools, as well as arts teachers. Across all 4 of these domains, we have 19 indicators, 12 of which are available online today. And this is just the start. We expect to add new domains and indicators to the framework in the future. Now, I want to acknowledge the important linkages that also exist across indicators and domains. The NASERC team has developed 2 cross-cutting topic areas: arts at the intersection and arts and underserved populations. The NASERC team included these cross-cutting topic areas to allow for examination of factors such as equity and accessibility, as well as how arts indicators and domains interact with other socially defined topics. As an example, intersectional topics may include arts and health, arts and aging, arts and construction, arts and digital transformation, arts and societal or community impacts, and arts and military or veteran populations. Now, I'd like to give you a demonstration or a tour of our online resources for NASERC. So bear with me one moment as I bring up our webpage. Great. So you can access NASERC by navigating to arts.gov. We're on here now. Going to Impact Research, or you can just type in NEA Arts Research into your search engine and you'll go to the same place. From there, you will see NASERC listed on our research page with the little icon. Here's the main NASERC page. This page has an overview of the center, including a 1-page summary infographic that has a succinct summary of what NASERC is, what the Arts Indicators Framework is, and of course the 4 domains that I just mentioned. Scrolling down, we have an interactive tool that allows you to see our current indicators across 4 domains. So I can click on arts and cultural assets and then go back to see the quadrant again. I can click on artists and other cultural workers. Here I see that there are 5 key indicators that are currently available, and I can click Learn More to navigate to the artists and other cultural workers page. Here on the domain page for artists and other cultural workers, we have an overview of what this domain intends to cover, as well as an infographic detailing key indicators that we currently have available and the general scope of the domain. Below is where we have the main way you can access key findings and analysis related to each indicator. So as you can see there, we have the 5 here. Let's focus on A2, who are other cultural workers. This indicator highlights the number of other cultural workers by occupation, demographic group, and other relevant individual characteristics. I can click on A2 report, and we have a report showing key statistics from the using the most current data available. Reports like these generally are no more than 6 to 10 pages and include useful summaries and charts to help you understand a particular topic. And there are reports like these for every indicator, all 12 that we have online right now. You can also click A2 tables, and that will give you a zip file full of data tables if you really want to dive into the data for a particular indicator. So you can see it looks something like this. This is more for people who really want to get deep into the analytical weeds, so to speak. So I will also mention that these reports will be updated as new data become available. So you can expect that when you click on A1 report, that will just offer the most up-to-date statistics that we have at present. I'm now going to go back to our main page. And I'm going to scroll down past the quadrant that you saw before to get to our technical report. We have a technical report if you want to learn more about how the NASERC team reviewed possible data sources, developed the arts indicators framework. This, for instance, this little graphic here shows, you don't have to read it right now, but it shows their process of constructing the framework and receiving input and conceiving of the indicators, both the 12 that we have available today, as well as the additional 7 that will come later this year. Going back to our main page, we also have some additional information about future topics and questions that we'd like to pursue. One thing that I will mention is that once all planned indicators are online, we will also have a reliable schedule to let you know when indicators will be updated, either annually or when new data become available. In the future, you will also find topical reports, practitioner guides, and field scans on this page. And lastly, if you have any technical questions or require additional assistance, you can speak with experts on the NASERC team through the help desk email, which is listed at the bottom of every NASERC page. And now I'll go back to our slides. Okay. Now, I want to take a step back. Remember, we get data from a variety of federal sources, and that is what populates the indicators that I just showed you. If you want raw data, we have the National Archive of Data on Arts and Culture, or NADAC. It is a free data repository for researchers, educators, and students to access arts and cultural data from federal and non-federal sources alike. NADAC also tracks publications that use datasets housed within the archive, and it hosts periodic webinars. This resource complementary to our new NASERC project. In brief, NADAC, the data archive, is where the raw data live. But NASERC, the Art Statistics Center, is where you will be able to access key metrics using some of that data. Okay, I have shared a lot, and I encourage you to explore NASERC on your own. It's available online right now. And now I will introduce our first panel to switch gears. Our first panel is Scoping the Federal Context. Sunil Iyengar will moderate this panel. We are joined by the following panelists: Vipin Arora, Director of the Bureau of Economic Analysis; Christina Choka-Eller, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Social Studies at Harvard University; Lena Guzman, Chief Strategy Officer of Child Trends; Chip Walker, Co-Chair of the Emergency Preparedness and Response Team and Special Assistant within Economic Programs Directorate at the U.S. Census Bureau. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. And I want to echo your thanks, Patricia, to the AIR team and our technical working group have been really amazing in helping us get this off the ground. So thanks to them. And thank you all for joining me today, those of you, those on this panel. Really great to have you here. I wanted to get this started by noting that you each use data and evidence in your own ways. Two of you are in the business of producing federal data and curating it for the purpose of policymakers. One of you is an academic researcher who's been monitoring how evidence and data are used in federal decision-making. And another of you is with a think tank dedicated to translating evidence into practice. So I thought before we dive into a discussion about what a resource like NASERC can provide the arts sector, I was hoping each of you could describe in your own words where you sit in relation to data and evidence in your daily jobs. Maybe you could each introduce yourselves and your organization and talk about that. I'll call on you in turn, one at a time for a few minutes each. Vipin, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely, Sunil. And, thanks for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Vipin Arora. I'm wearing a headset and I have on a red tie. And according to my kids, I have crooked teeth, but I'll ask you not to look at those as I go. Right. So in terms of your specific question, I like to think of BEA, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, producing data and evidence. That's what we do. I often make the statement that we at BEA build critical American infrastructure. And so infrastructure, it certainly isn't for me, it might not be the first word that comes to your mind when you think about data. But I think of statistics, the BEA, that Census, the BLS, that others produce as modern infrastructure, just like bridges and tunnels. You might consider traditional infrastructure, right? So why do I make that comparison? Bridges are essential for transportation and commerce. I'd argue that our statistics are essential to the smooth functioning of financial markets, for international trade, and for policymaking. So I do this with a little trepidation, but I think I have an analogy that might work with composers. I didn't try this out on anyone beforehand, so I'm gonna try it here live. But just like composers write and arrange music, at BEA, at Census, we're going to produce statistics and data. So other people can take our statistics and build evidence or inform policy, just like different musicians are going to take the work of a composer and interpret it in their own, different ways. So I think, the analogy fits. And I'll finish by just pointing out what are, some of our well-known statistics. I think you have to start with gross domestic product, or GDP, maybe the world's best known economic statistics, statistic. I believe most people probably have heard of that. So I'm going to stick with my earlier analogy. And given how popular GDP is, I might compare it with an opera like Verdi's La Traviata, right? It's the most popular statistic. That might be the world's most popular opera, right? And I think you can kind of make that comparison. I'm beating this analogy to death, so Neil, I'm going to stop right now.
No, that's great.
But,
it's highly well.
We also produce statistics on prices, international trade, economic activity at the state, metro, and county levels, and special topics as well. And I'll just finish by saying we've been working with the NEA team, and Sunil in particular, since 2012 on estimating arts and cultural economic activity. And in fact, we just released an update to those estimates on March 25th. So Sunil, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Vipin. It's a pleasure to work with you too. How about you, Lena? Love to hear from you.
Hi, well, thank you so much for the opportunity. Delighted to be here and delighted to see this incredible resource. I'm Lena Guzman. I have brownish black hair, shoulder length, and am wearing all black. Apparently, I'm just in the team today.
That's all right.
So the longtime user of federal statistical data, completely agree that federal data is very much part of our nation's infrastructure. And I'm just delighted to see that this new resource is available to measure and monitor the arts in our communities. At Child Trends, I serve as our Chief Strategy Officer and Director of our Hispanic Institute. For those of you who may be less familiar with Child Trends, we're a nonpartisan research organization that's dedicated to improving the lives of children and youth. And as our name suggests, we monitor trends in child well-being. And in this capacity, we are big consumers and users of federal statistical data and often have partnered with federal agencies to improve our measures of child well-being. And we sit very much at the intersection of research, policy, and communication. So we make sure that not only are we doing applied research to inform programs and policies to better support our nation's children and youth, we're making sure that we are also communicating this research effectively and clearly and engaging with the policy communities, philanthropies, and others who are in a position to serve Latino children and youth. I direct the National Research Center on Hispanic Children and Families, which is funded by the Administration for Children and Families within HHS. And you can visit our website for some resources, HispanicResearchCenter.org, including some resources around data capacity for understanding Latino communities and their diversity and heterogeneity. And I will add the website on our chat as soon as I get a chance, but looking forward to a lively conversation.
Thank you very much, Lena. How about you, Chip? It'd be great to hear from you.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody, and Sunil and everyone. Thank you for inviting the Census Bureau today. The Census Bureau and NEA, as was stated earlier, we have a long relationship of working together collaboratively to look at participation in the arts. My role at the Census Bureau, I really focus in two areas. One is emergency management, where I try and connect all aspects of disaster management with the data that the Census Bureau has on a particular geography of interest, whether it's preparedness all the way through response and recovery. And what a lot of people don't know about the Census Bureau, I think, is that we are one of the largest collectors of data on the economy and businesses. Everyone has heard of the decennial census, but every 5 years we conduct an economic census as well. And we have numerous economic surveys that are done on a regular basis. We also produce, but don't necessarily release. They normally come from a different department, but we are really behind the scenes producing about 3/4 of the leading economic indicators that you hear about on a regular basis. The other area that I work a lot in, and I think what I'll be talking about today, is equity and helping to identify underserved communities. And when President Biden first got into office, one of his first executive orders was on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we have developed a number of products that I'll be talking about later that help find those parts of the community that are underserved and need special attention. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chip. I look forward to hearing about that, and I think our audience will too. Christina, great to see you again. And, I was going to say that in addition to answering these questions, maybe you could relate to how we got to know each other.
Very good. I was planning on it, but thank you so much, Sunil, and it's great to be here. I'm Christina Chaka-Eller, Assistant Professor of Sociology and Social Studies at Harvard University. I have longish, wavy brown hair, and I'm wearing a green button-down shirt, and I have a kind of yellow background, so I'm stark against the yellow. So, Yes. How did we come to know each other? It's a great question. So I had the pleasure of serving as Assistant Director of Evidence and Policy in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy from the summer of 2021 through the end of 2022. And in that capacity, it was really my job to think about the ways in which data and evidence are channeled into policy and practice throughout the US federal government infrastructure. And so I thought a lot about data and evidence on a daily basis. And I also had the great pleasure of being able to stand back up a social and behavioral sciences cross-agency working group, which was really trying to think about how social and behavioral scientific evidence can be harnessed for our policymaking processes inside the United States government. Since I've been back at Harvard, which is just over a year now, I'm back to my day job of being a scholar of organizational inequality, focusing on the US higher education sector. But I've picked up another day job, which is really to continue to be in conversations, academic and otherwise, about our use of evidence as a federal community, but really as a United States community. I think quite a lot about the overlaps and intersections between policy, practice, and academic research. I've become rather obsessed with the translation, especially of academic research, into more functional knowledge for policymakers and decision makers writ large, coming from my experience in the government. And so I would say, as a researcher, as a scholar, data and evidence are essentially my whole life as a citizen and someone concerned with ensuring that we really can use what we're learning to get better. And similar to what Chip was saying, with a focus on equity in particular, I really think there's a lot of work to be done in this translation space, which is really why I'm so excited to talk about NASERC today.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. And, you've all had a chance now to look at what the NEA is releasing today and, an online hub for statistics and evidence reports about the arts. And of course, you heard from Patricia just earlier when she did her little tour or demo of the web pages. I just love to hear your first impressions. And specifically, how does what we're trying to do connect with the way you see federal data used by other sectors to track their own progress or to chart their own futures? What kind of other monitoring or reporting systems might exist in your own industry or sector that they come to mind that are analogous to what we're trying to build here? That would be helpful, I think, for all of us to know. Can I start with you, Lena? I know I'm doing this with no particular order, but love to hear from you.
Sure. Like I said, again, I think this is a panel of self-professed data nerds, which I am thrilled to be a part of. And I think that this new resource really does complement and expand several efforts that the federal government has, in particular in the space of children and families. Two particularly come to mind. And I'm sure you have heard some of this from your colleagues at the American AIR, the American Institute for Research. One is childstats.gov, which is led by the Federal Interagency Forum on Child and Family Statistics that provides the latest data on 41 indicators I just checked last night on child and family well-being. And when I started my career, I think they were launching, and it was a much more smaller set of indicators, but similar to your efforts, they have demographic indicators on children and families, family and social environments. Also similar to your efforts, economic circumstances, and of course, education, which currently, I checked again, doesn't include an indicator on the arts, but I'm hoping that the National Endowment of the Arts will join the forum and join the efforts of the Interagency Forum to include arts indicators on arts participation in K-12 and in higher ed in the near future, and also, of course, the workforce serving our K-12 and higher ed. And then another thing that I think is very aligned with the efforts here, in 2020 and 2012, the Administration for Children and Families launched what is now called the National Survey of Early Care and Education to understand the supply and demand of childcare and the early care and education workforce, which again aligns with the fourth domain, which is to understand the supply and demand of arts teachers. So one thing two things I wanted to note here is I understand that right now the measure is limited to K to 12 and post-secondary, but I really do hope and encourage you to consider expanding it to early care and education workforce and after school programming, because the love of arts begins very early, and arts is an important component of the early care and education curriculum. And we also know that arts is happening in after school programming. So I think this is an incredible opportunity to really showcase how integrated arts are in so many of our industries and touch all our communities, and want to make sure that we're not missing out on some key aspects or segments of the workforce. And then another thought that I also, the American Time Use Survey, which is housed in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think is another great conduit for adding items about how people spend their time with the arts, because we already have a survey that is capturing how people, Americans are spending their time in both employment, leisure, family, and so on. So I think that's another great opportunity in the future for you all to expand on and collaborate with.
Thank you so much, Lena. As it happens, we have the American Time Use Survey, but I think you're right. It does also tell you about activities done with people. And so that's a really interesting dimension. And I love the idea of the pre-K population to add teachers as well as students. So thank you so much. Chip, you had some things you were hoping to share with us, and we definitely want to hear them.
Thank you. Thank you. So the Census Bureau is very committed to evidence type work. How do we know that the work that we're doing actually succeeds in what the original goal is? So we're always committed to the Evidence Act, which was passed a number of years ago by Congress. And we work with other agencies to supply them data that may help them use more evidence-based policymaking. Additionally, and I'm sorry, because I know I've yet to describe myself. So I'm a 60-year-old African-American male. I'm wearing a blue shirt and a black jacket. One of the things that I wanted to talk about where the Census Bureau has been very active is in community resilience. And so what that really means to the Census Bureau and some of the newer data products that we are is we look at survey data from the American Community Survey at the person level. So this information is not available to the public. And then we aggregate some things. And what we do is we try and look at what we call components of social vulnerability. And those would be things like you have a disability, maybe you speak English less than very well, which is a question that's asked. Maybe you don't have vehicle access. Maybe you're 65 and older and living alone. And so we look at these, and what research shows is that when you get 3 or more of these risk factors or these components of social vulnerability, then it makes you less likely to have an outcome to any type of stress or shock that happens to your community. One of the great things about the community resilience estimates is you can take it down to the census tract level. And without getting really technical on what a census tract is, you can think of it as a neighborhood. So when you look at data, let's say at the county level, you will find often that the wealthier, more well-to-do parts of a county mask the underserved communities that may be within that county. But when you can take it and look at a map on the census tract level, you can find these pockets of what we would declare would be underserved communities. And as it pertains to the arts, for example, we have been working with the National Credit Union Administration on the location of credit unions throughout the country. And you put it on a map, and the base map will be community resilience estimates at the census tract level. And you can see the relationships of these credit unions to underserved communities. And sometimes they're not in the underserved communities. Now, does that mean necessarily that a credit union is going to be built there? No, but you've identified a place where you need to do special resources, maybe they're mobile resources or something else, to make sure that you're not leaving that community short of resources that it could use. And in conversations with Sunil, we were talking about, could we map cultural deserts, for example? and look at the relationship of these underserved communities to how close is something arts related, cultural related to these communities. Is it nearby? Is it not nearby? Is there transportation to even get there should someone want to seek that out? And so these are the types of things that we work together. And Sunil and I actually work on an equity working group together. That's how we've gotten to know each other over the past couple of years, as equity is such a big focus within the federal government right now.
That's super exciting to me. Thank you very much. And any ideas from others are always welcome on anything that anyone else has said. I'm going to ask Christina and then Vipin, and then I'll have one more question for you folks. Thank you again. Christina?
Thanks, Sunil. So now back on the outside of government, one thing that academic researchers are constantly thinking about is how can we get raw data in order to be able to really analyze at quite a detailed level the patterns, trends that we're most interested in based on our research. So I think about things, I mean, I'm so glad that the raw data underlying NASERC are available for those of us who really do want to geek out and pull down the tables and stick them in our statistical software and so on, which is fantastic. But I also think about efforts across the federal government that are being made right now to make the process of data sharing with those outside of the federal government easier and more seamless, especially when it comes to restricted data. So I'm thinking about the standard application portal, which is a byproduct of the Evidence Act, as well as the pilot for a national secure data service, which would enable researchers eventually, it's kind of inside pilot form right now, to access linked federal data across multiple agencies. And I think this issue of just links across agencies, which of course has come up today, could not be more important, especially if we're thinking about sectors where the kind of data stores might be in a few different places, and we're really trying to create a composite picture. And also when we're trying to deal with numbers that might be low with certain groups doing certain activities, where we want to protect folks' privacy and confidentiality while still being able to get a kind of statistical picture that really helps us on the outside understand how the world is working on a number of different outcomes. So I think about all of those things. And then I also think about just, getting from point A to point B when it comes to translating the data analyses and knowledge that come from the raw data into legible products that someone who's not wanting to get the raw data can access and still really understand what's going on, which essentially I think is what NASERC is doing. But there have been efforts now for some time across many different federal agencies to use data dashboards, kind of higher level statistics, indicators like you've pulled today, and so on, to really make this easier. For example, there's a really nice kind of ongoing evolving site having to do with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the spending of money that has gone along with that. It's just one example. But I think the more we can do to make those strong connections between what the detailed granular stuff is underneath the hood and what the shiny top of the car looks like, the better when it comes to everyone more democratically having access to the kind of data, evidence, information that can help us understand our communities and our decisions better.
That's so helpful. Thank you very much, Christina. Vipin.
Yeah, thanks, Sunil. And so my initial thought is that what you're doing in NEA, I think it complements nicely, with the many efforts that are going on, some of which we just heard in and around data and evidence building, but both inside and outside of government. I think the collaboration that we have with NEA, BEA, and NEA around the arts and cultural economic activity is a good example. So we call this the Arts and Cultural Production Satellite Account, or ACPSA. That's a bit of a mouthful, but just to orient everyone, a BEA satellite accounts, they're supplementary statistics that allow analysis of a particular aspect of the economy. So we have 8 different satellite accounts, and these things they range widely. I mean, we've got one that estimates the size of the U.S. space economy, for example, and we've got another that measures the American travel and tourism economy. Very popular one, that one as well. But going back to the ACPSA, as I mentioned, we've been producing this in partnership with NEA since 2012, and it's been a very collaborative throughout. And as you can imagine, a big challenge is defining arts and culture. If I was in the audience, I'd be like, well, how did you define that? That would be my first question, is how do you do that? It's a lot of technical, gory details, and I know Sunil was in the bowels of when we were doing this, but like the big thing is that definition has to fit with the context of either a statistic, going back to something that Chip said earlier, and a lot of those statistics come from the U.S. Census Bureau. So it's got to fit within those indicators and that framework. I won't describe it here, but I mean, some of you are probably thinking, all right, that's great, but what can this information be used for? And like I said, Sunil can talk, I think, at length about how NEA uses the data from the ACPSA. I think in general, we find at BEA that people use statistics from our satellite accounts for a variety of purposes that range all the way from policymaking to teaching. It's amazing. One of our other satellite accounts is called the Outdoor Recreation Satellite Account. It might be the most popular one, and teachers love it. It's used all over the place. That's a highlight, the outdoor recreation economy, if you like. So a couple examples, Sunil, I'll kick it back over to you, but thanks for that question.
Oh, this is really great. And I think it also underscores how a lot of what we're doing is we're working with existing materials, right? Like these are the data sources that do exist. We're trying to maximize the use of them and elevate where the arts exist in those data sets, recognizing there's always room for improvement and refining some of the constructs informing those data sets. But it's really been a pleasure that's a great example too. So I know we don't have much time, and I do want to kind of honor your time, of course, and those of the panelists to come. But maybe I'll ask one question, and maybe those of you who feel you can answer it, just raise your hand or just jump right in. Probably all of you could answer this, but I'm trying to also keep us on time here. The question I think that would really benefit us at the NEA, but also I hope our colleagues and those who work with us out there who are watching is, do you, from your own, given your backgrounds, I think it's fair to say your careers right now are not arts centric, although Vipin brought up opera in a very nice context, and Lena, of course, and Chip also raised the arts very eloquently. Can we, just from your perspective, how can we as an arts agency help the public better integrate data and evidence into policy and practice? That's a big one, I know. But I know you all struggle with that in your own ways. And we obviously want these tools to be used, right? And it's not only going to be quantitative information. Just to reiterate what Patricia said earlier, there will be guides, there will be evidence-based reports and field scans, but still those things have to be used. So I guess in a way, do either anyone have any thoughts about that aspect, about how to kind of make things more usable, user-friendly? Vipin has his hand up.
I'll just say, Sunil, it's all, to me, and for BEA, I think it's all about relevance. Relevance. And, the people listening, taxpayers, they demand relevance. And we have to make sure that the products we provide give them the kind of evidence that they're looking for. And so I think that would be the key from our perspectives, and making sure you stay relevant to what your users need. Thanks.
That's a good North Star. Christina?
Two quick thoughts here. One thought is simply that a lot of arts organizations, I am sure, really need data and evidence to make cases about why they should continue to exist as nonprofits, many of them. And so I think there's a quite direct translation about the ways in which this kind of information can really be pulled on and used as the arts community is helping to make sense of its centrality and importance in United States culture and society. And I say this as a total theater nerd and one who thought I was going to run nonprofit theaters for my life. So love the arts. And then the second quick thing that I just wanted to add is I think we have all these false binaries around data and evidence being so hard and so concrete, and the arts or something being, more kind of subjective or touchy-feely. Why can't we make art with data and evidence? I can imagine some really cool integrations here, especially in youth arts communities, around how we use sense making and numbers to also make art. So who knows, maybe there's a challenge.gov thing coming up about.
Hey, I love that.
I think there are lots of creative ways that we could think about
that. That's great. Thank you so much. Lena.
Yeah, just adding to the great thoughts that Christina and Vipin had, I could not agree more about relevancy and access. So at the local level, you know, this can be a treasure trove for community art-based programs that are looking to do grant applications, right? What is the need? What is the gaps? And so Chip, your work, the maps that you've created, those interactive maps that actually go at the track level are just, you know, priceless for community-based programs that don't have access to, you know, can't just run their own numbers. And every time I talk to programs, what they want is, what data do you have for my community? And they're talking below county level. So the fact that, you know, there's a track level data that is accessible would be music to community-based programs. And again, those things like, you know, increasing the accessibility. So it's those dashboards. But again, for community-based programs, it really needs to be local. The national indicators are great, but for the local programs, they really do need local data. And then again, in terms of relevancy, making sure that it reflects how communities see and think of art and how they define art, right? So for example, storytelling is an art form for many Latino and Indigenous all communities, right? But it's a very prominent art form that our traditional measures probably are not capturing. You know, you know, in quotation marks, street graffiti art is another one. Are those being captured? And are those the places where we're collecting data? They may not be happening at the cultural centers, but may be happening in other places, parks, you know, in public spaces. So just making sure it reflects communities, how communities view art, I think is really important.
Amen to that. That's really, really important. Thank you so much. Chip, did you have anything to add or?
Sure,
anything?
Sure. Thank you. So one of the things that we've sort of retooled at the Census Bureau, and it's something that we call statistical products first. And what that basically means is we're shifting from being totally mission focused to be more data user focused, so that we are really getting out there doing listening sessions. And instead of sort of telling people what we think they need, we ask them, what kind of data do you need that is going to make either your work or help you in your life? And then we can design things around the customer need, as opposed to sort of just designing something and just throwing it out there, right? And we've done that with a lot of different data tools where we sort of design the data tool a little bit. One that I'm referring to is called My Community Explorer. And if I can, I'll drop a link to it in the chat, if that's permissible, Sunil. But and so we want to give something so people can react to it. So we gave them a little taste of what we can do, and then we just started asking people for feedback. And now it's a pretty dynamic tool that allows you to go down to the track level, look at community resilience estimates. You can do change the base map around. It's just a phenomenal tool, and it gives you a great deal of information. But we're just trying to be more customer focused than we've ever been before.
Thanks. We could also use that approach, and we'll try to stick to that as well. Thank you all so very much for joining us. And I think Patricia is going to call a break, but then we'll hear from another group of panelists. Let's do some virtual applause. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, we are going to go for a 5-minute break.
Back with our next round of panelists.
Indeed.
So please stay tuned, stay on. Thanks.
I am going to, thank you very much, Christine. I'm going to introduce our next panel. Now we will go to our second panel, Harnessing Public Data and Evidence for Decision-Making in the Arts. Sunil will moderate again. We are joined today by Suzanne Charles, partner at Root of Two, Keith Krutt, manager of Analytics and Enterprise Architecture, National Gallery of Art, Judy Lee Reed, CEO of United States Artists, and Ryan Stubbs, Senior Director of Research at the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies. Take it away, Sunil.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. And that was a great conversation we had just now. I want to thank you all again for joining us today. Panel 2, it's a real great pleasure to be here with you today. So in a similar vein as we had in the previous this panel, I wanted to ask you all, maybe start by telling us a little bit about what you do and how you use data and evidence in your own work. And, you know, if there are any specific examples of evidence or data sets, metrics, or research reports that you found particularly useful in your work. I know that could cover a lot of ground. So you could just maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourselves, and we can get to that. I also just want to acknowledge that at least two of you are on our technical working group for this project, Ryan Stubbs and Cezanne Charles. So full disclosure, but I think it's going to be a candid discussion. Who wants to go first? I'll just volunteer someone. Judy Lee, do you mind?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks, Sunil. Hi, everyone. I'm Judy Lee Reed. I am a 50-something-year-old Korean person with salt and pepper, short hair, and thick black-rimmed glasses. And I'm sitting in front of a blurred background, so you cannot see the mess that is my office. And I'm really happy to be here. You know, I want to tell a little. I do want to give an example of how United States Artists has used data. And I also just want to provide a fun anecdote that it was really two key data points that indicated United States Artists founding as an organization. And that was data surfaced by the Urban Institute in a public poll, which revealed that 96% of Americans valued art in their lives, while only 27% valued artists. And our work at United States Artists is to support artists with unrestricted support that exists outside of political contexts and challenges. And with almost now 20 years of offering the United States Artists Fellowship Award, we have supported over 800 artists with a cumulative total of over $39 million. And we've demonstrated many dimensions of how the artist population in the United States and the cultural diversity it represents in our effort to address how society values artists. And you know, currently national indicators describing certain dimensions of the artist population provide a perspective on our work over the long term, but it's really been some shorter term research and surveys that have impressed our decision making in the near term as we consider the expansion of our work. And I'll just provide a very brief example, which was during the pandemic. United States Artists worked with a number of national arts organizations to mount a $23 million relief fund that supported over 4,000 artists who are experiencing the effects of the pandemic from a financial perspective. And just following that temporary grant making program, Lisa Yancey Consulting and Americans for the Arts started digging in and did some surveys and some additional research work to better understand the effects of the pandemic on artists. And so just to put this into perspective, going into the pandemic, artists were almost 3 times as likely to live in poverty as the general population. And 2 out of 3 of the respondents to this survey had less than 2 months savings. And this was prior to the pandemic. Now, prior to the pandemic, we also saw that 29% of those surveyed had 0 savings. And that number rose to 55% during the pandemic. The negative effects of the pandemic were experienced disproportionately by respondents who were people of color, people with disabilities, people from lower household income levels, and those living in urban areas. And again, data like this put into perspective the experiences and the vulnerabilities that artists were sharing with us, but gave us a kind of data view on it that was really, really important and impressing how we might be thinking about our work. So, you know, I want to national data can help us understand the challenges that artists face in pursuing a career. And I want to just highlight that pursuing a career in which in the United States, I think it's likely that there's no other profession in our labor force that by such great measure must pursue their profession by augmenting it through other sources of income. Having a day job is a longstanding condition through which artists gain resources like reliable income and other benefits, including sick time and paid time off and affordable health insurance. And for us at United States Artists, this really describes the conditions for the artists that impact why we're supporting them, how we're supporting them, and our goals for supporting, expanding that support into the future. And I'm happy to talk more about this as we continue.
That's a great tangible example. I love those, the fact that the founding of the or how the United States Artists came into being as part of that to address those needs. Fantastic. Keith, so I kind of smuggled in, if those of you are paying close attention to affiliations, a federal employee here, even though we had a panel with feds, but I thought it would be good to hear from you, Keith, because I think of you as a thought partner in this whole sector, if you will, in addition to your federal hat. But go ahead, Keith.
Thanks, Sunil. I feel the same way. And Julie, thanks so much for that information. That was such powerful statistics there. I'm Keith Krett, visual description. I have short brown and gray hair and beard. I'm wearing a blue shirt and gray jacket. For us, we use data in a nutshell to inform and align our strategy and goals. So in part, that can be understanding our audiences and impact, in part, how we can cultivate and share our collection and our content, how that can roll into our operations on a day-to-day basis. So, for example, we might take a look at folks who visit us here in Washington, D.C. at the museum and what's happening during the visit and the experience that they're having and feedback. But really, the fact is, most people can't come to DC and experience the museum, and our mission is scoped to serve the nation. So how can we also understand what we're sharing out across the nation in different programs and our online presence, and tune that information as well? And then how can we roll that into just understanding our capabilities and what it's going to take to reach audiences in different ways? So the example that Chip provided before as well around mapping out, for instance, across the country where there might be art museum deserts, using information like AAMD or IMLS surveys, and then understanding how that relates to ACS data on demographics in those areas, and then identifying where there might be partners in those regions or different ways that we can reach different audiences there. One of many different kinds of things that we're doing with data here. In order to do that, we're essentially supporting a small centralized team that can enable a broader decentralized community of practice, which all fits in context with collaboration across different partners, museums, institutions. And we try to do as much as we can to use linked data principles and open source our code and analysis. So I'm so glad to be making these connections and excited about NASERC. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Keith. Cezanne, another great colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cezanne, and by way of visual description, I am an African-American female, 50-ish, with salt and pepper gray hair that is naturally curly, shoulder length. I am wearing a dark blue wool top, button-down wool top, and I have bookshelves behind me. And I think in addition to sort of serving on the technical working group and being party to kind of the conversations that we've had, I spent the better part of my career working to support and to think about the supports for individual artists and creative practitioners. And I should also say it's important to me because I am one, right? So I really bring that kind of lens to the research work that I've done, that it's really peer driven and very artist centric in the way that it's scoped. And over the last several years, as a sort of complement to the way that we had to do a lot of rapid reporting during the pandemic, specifically around individual artists and creative practitioners, I think we did the exact opposite. We did the very slow report, right? Where it was really focused on kind of a mixed methods approach, centering kind of participatory like responses directly from artists and really making sure that artist voice was a central part of the work. But what we found as we were really trying to understand the notion of preconditions of place that these artists were like experiencing, and there are inherent problems with finding every single artist that you want to find in a federal data set. But when you break break it down to that sort of, public use microdata area that allows you to sort of build up a kind of city profile, what you get is something that can be used as a baseline. And so in our case, we were really interested in Detroit, Memphis, and New Orleans. And more importantly, we were wanting to work with the American Community Survey in ways that first disaggregated the data fully by race and ethnicity, that then re-aggregated it so that we could compare sort of the experience of BIPOC creative workers with their white counterparts, as well as to sort of amplify the kind of dimensions that were covered in our research. And that was really centering around access and opportunities, health and well-being, money and legal, some of the assets and infrastructure conversations that we've had. And for us, what that provided was a way of describing the kind of background conditions, or almost kind of social determinants, if you will, that artists are experiencing. If it's prevalent in your community, 9 times out of 10, artists and cultural workers are being deeply impacted by it. And even more so when we're actually talking about, BIPOC creative workers. And so, our study takes a real sort of qualitative approach that then is backed up by these statistical snapshots that allowed us, to play with those methods, but it was always in the sense of like touching back to the work that the National Endowment has done for a very long time in helping us understand and describe kind of artists and other cultural workers. So being able to borrow methodologies and then sort of, take them down to that local level really helped us to enrich what the artists were telling us in the study. And it's forthcoming. It was a 3-year-long project, but the study is forthcoming shortly, called Looking Back to Move Forward.
No, that's great, Cezanne. And I should also just reinforce that there's a mutual benefit in when researchers use our data or use data that and analyses that are parallel to ours, it invariably improves the quality of our own work and makes us ask harder questions about the data we're looking at and the analyses we're undertaking. So this is a great example of where that process is in motion. And speaking of partners and research partners, I just want to say with Ryan, those of you who don't know about the federal arts, those of you who are tuning in who may not know about how federal arts funding works, the NEA has great partners with the state arts agencies and regional arts organizations in this country, and roughly really 40% of our appropriated funds go to these organizations for future grant making to extend and amplify this work. And so Ryan's team and ours have a great research rapport as it is, but let me turn it over to you, Ryan, to say things in your own words.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, Sunil. And I agree, we have a great research rapport between the NEA and state arts agencies. Thanks for having me. I'm Ryan Stubbs. I serve as the Senior Director of Research at the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, or NASA. And I'll make the obligatory joke that, yes, we are the other NASA. By way of description, I'm a middle-aged man with brown hair, a gray shirt, and black-rimmed glasses. So NASA is the professional association for the nation's 56 state arts agencies. And as Sunil just mentioned, 40% of the NEA's program budget is distributed through state arts agencies and regional arts organizations. And that partnership really amplifies federal funds for the arts across the country. So in our work, we are highly interested in understanding how the public sector, and specifically how state governments, can best serve all residents across all geographies and communities. And I think regardless of viewpoints, there are positive outcomes that we all hope for, outcomes such as thriving communities, economic vitality, opportunities for high quality education, and a healthy citizenry in terms of physical health and mental health. And from a policy perspective, to understand these things, we need data. And data that is especially useful for NASA is first an understanding of how funding for the arts reaches communities and making sure that everyone has access to arts opportunities. So in this case, I'll echo what Keith said and what Chip said earlier, that geographic data is really vital. We want to know how individuals and communities have the opportunity to participate and experience the arts. And we use state arts agency grant-making data that can be analyzed in conjunction with census data by geography. And that's really important for us to understand the reach of public funding on the state level and the local level. And also for state arts agencies, it's important to have data that speaks to the instrumental value of the arts. And a data set that's made possible, and we've heard about this from Sunil and others, that is from the NEA and the BEA. It's extremely helpful to understand the large economic contributions of the arts, and that's the Arts and Cultural Production Satellite Account, or ACPSA. And NASA does partner with NEA to help visualize these data by state and understand the unique value that the arts and culture brings to every state economy. So it's of course useful for the public in general and policymakers to know about the substantial economic contributions of the arts by state, but it's also interesting for state arts agencies to understand the industry strengths and trends that might inform partnerships and strategies. And also we've commissioned research. I'll mention some research that was commissioned by NASA from the University of Indiana, Indianapolis, and Professor Doug Noonan, that shows how the arts sector can actually drive overall growth in state economies. So going back to, I think, Vipin's composer metaphor, the data provided by the NEA and BEA can be the notes that are played and arranged to make meaning and better understand the value of the arts. And so there's many data sets that we work with that are really valuable that we can mention, but I'd also just point out that there's a lot of overlaps between what NASERC is surfacing and the data that are useful to practitioners at state arts agencies, and including things such as arts education, which are foundational investments that are made by states.
Thank you, Ryan. So I think we all probably would want to talk a little bit about, what we see. Earlier Vipin and others were describing a data infrastructure, if you will. And so looking at the federal data infrastructure, or maybe you're thinking regionally, or maybe you're thinking organizational membership data, or other places we go for arts related, statistics and information. What do you see some gaps in that infrastructure? What are some really critical needs that you see that you wish there was a ready-made solution for, or maybe you're hopeful that we can maybe even through NASERC get there? I'd love to hear about that from your own lenses. Anyway, we don't have to go in a particular order, but I'm going to call on Cezanne again, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, I think that this is a conversation that is both about the kind of gaps in data sets, but it's also about kind of the way that we go about constructing, like what is it and what's, sort of external to them. And so I think, we've had a long conversation around what to do with like the NICS codes and the SOC codes. I should say that I started off doing creative economy research at the statewide level and, played with a lot of those quarterly census, employment and wage data sets and those sorts of things. But more recently, I've come to the idea that it's like we need good enough data to sort of make policy on, right? Or to sort of really dive into the nitty-gritty of practice on. And some of that has to be backed up by this kind of contextual thing. And I think the gap for me is in that sort of ability for the arts sector to use data with confidence to actually make sort of applied policy. And I think that this is one of the areas that NASERC has been really helpful, is in being able to both describe what the data does and what it doesn't do, what stories it can tell and what stories it can't tell, and then sort of offer a real sort of, signpost of how you go about doing it, should you want to sort of dive into the data set. And so I think for me, I sort of want to get out of like the quest for the perfection of data. But I will say where I find we lag behind consistently in the way that we think about data in the arts is around this sort of digital transformation and how we really begin to stop being in a reactive position around like what digital inclusion looks like around creative workers. But then also, what are those real-time sort of, at scale economic indicators that are coming down as a result of artificial intelligence and challenges to intellectual property that we have to sort of get out ahead of? And I think to start with a literature review of how other fields are tackling that might be something that would be really helpful, but also backed up with some digital inclusion data, which is available through the ACS.
So anyone want to pile on to that comment, those comments? I'll also say that you could even think of this in terms of any research questions or topics, not only about data gaps, but yeah, go ahead, Keith, you were saying something.
I mean, this is really well said, and anything I'd say on topics would probably echo earlier points in the call. I mean, how do people engage in the arts? What do educators need? You know, what do people need to support their creativity? How are we emerging technologies affecting our space, relationship to mental health? So many of these topics are, you know, there's so many things to report on that. I think what I want to pile on, Sis, on what you're saying is, there's so much data out there in so many different places, and it's really hard to find. So, you know, the ability to connect different data sources and help, you know, path across the different institutions that provide them, and then make those connections usable and discoverable, because most organizations don't have a data scientist on staff, you know, they might not even have an analyst on staff. So, you know, raw data can be really helpful for those who can use it, but what are the kind of staged or engineered data services that would be helpful for those who don't have those kinds of skills in their organization? Sometimes that might be, you know, manipulating base maps with GIS layers, as Chip mentioned earlier. You know, in the literature review describes this on, I mean, what if there was a chatbot that were, you know, kind of feeding all of the existing literature and emerging studies into, that we can just query to find what's out there in different places. But you know, if there's one other facet I'd add to this, it's just, you know, the contextualization and expertise around data sets is really vital for making sure they're not misinterpreted. And the idea of community is so critical, you know, in the focus of what we're using the data for, but also in how we're using the data. So how do we foster community among our NASERC and NADAC and other data set users? Is there some discussion forum that people can weigh in on? Is there a way to kind of build a living data catalog, or you know, ability to describe and stipulate about use of certain kinds of data? So yeah, a lot there, but you know, great topics, different feature sets and abilities to use data, discoverability and search across data, fostering community and being able to contextualize information. There's just so much great opportunity in how this can build out.
Oh, you're on mute, Sunil.
Sorry, thank you. Embarrassing to do that in a public webinar. Thank you very much. That was great, Keith. Judy Lee, thoughts other than I was on mute?
Yeah, I had. I think I have two thoughts about this, and maybe this kind of merges the question of what NASERC might think about its evolution over its operational perspective. And so the first is that I love the idea of legibility. I also love the idea of research librarians who can take a question that just comes from anyone in the public and can help wayfind into these data sets, because oftentimes I know from my perspective, working both in philanthropy and in the not-for-profit sector, that sometimes we don't even know the right questions to ask this data, and there's a certain level of precision required in order to get to the right data source or to the right set of indicators, et cetera. So there's that. And then I think the second thing I would encourage is potentially, from the questions that come in from the public, consider actually commissioning research that addresses those questions, so that the onus isn't just on the not-for-profit infrastructure organizations to both ask the questions, find the funding, and then, you know, use NASERC, which is terrific and a wonderful first step of what I hope will be many to kind of bridge this divide between how we understand and can use data, and then how we need to inform the improvement of it.
That's great. You know, I love the idea of wayfinding and having a structured way to do that and provide those services, maybe to come. So thank you for that. Keith, in our previous emails, you know, Keith noted that these are such rich topics, we could easily take more than the time allotted. And unfortunately, from your moderator, that's what's happened. But I'm going to still ask Ryan, because I know he's got some insights on this question, and or another question I would have asked anyone, and anyone could jump into this after Ryan, and then we'll probably have to end this. But Ryan, do you have any thoughts on what Judy Lee said? But the other question I was going to ask really is, you know, any advice or from anyone, you know, or ideas or cautionary notes as we get this thing going. You've already offered some great tips here and there, but if anyone has any parting thoughts on it, feel free to share them. But first, Ryan.
Yeah, and I think I can answer that and also kind of speak to the previous question as well, because I think there's a couple of things that the panel has surfaced, and I think there's around the ideas of capacity, right? The ability for organizations or others funding those organizations to fund research or data collection or allow for the capacity to gain insights. And I know that's a particular issue, especially with the many small organizations that exist out there. So, but then I think another side of that is that Cezanne sort of spoke to was perfection and data perfection that we can never get to, right? We'll never get to perfect data. It doesn't exist. Sometimes we can caught up in what we don't have and what isn't included, and that can lead to us feeling that something isn't valid. But I think it's still very important to surface those gaps, communicate about what is missing in those gaps, and think of the process as iterative. And I think that's similar to what we're thinking of as at the NASERC working group, right? I think what has been surfaced so far is a beginning. It's data that is available and out there, federally collected in many cases. And so that allows for many people to use the data. But that's also really important for understanding where you can dive in deeper. Where can there be more local studies? Where can there be more qualitative studies about understanding a particular issue or generating research questions that can be tested at the program level? So yeah, I think there's a lot that doesn't show up in the data. And for example, some of that work that's taking place from small organizations, perhaps individual artists, artist collectives, and ways that people are participating in the arts that may not get picked up in some of these larger data sets. Yeah, and I'll stop there.
No, that's a really good reminder, and we hope to be attentive to that. Any final thoughts from you, panelists, before we turn over? Anyone else? Well, I do want to offer my thanks to each and every one of you for being part of this panel and for these great ideas. Maybe we'll have a chatbot service with wayfinding and all sorts of great stuff. But I also think what Cezanne said about baseline data is really important, to think of this as a start. And we certainly hope to make progress with all this great input and the input we hope to receive from the public. I'll end with thank you very much. Give a round of applause to our panelists. And really for all our panelists, thank you for joining us, and you all who are joining us today. I think we have one last slide, Patricia, our all-important thank you slide, but also questions. If you all have any questions, and I know we didn't have the chat open, but there were some questions we tried to answer in the Q&A box, but please do feel free to send anytime questions about research to research@arts.gov, including anything you've seen today. But also the NASERC help desk from now on will be where questions specifically or comments about the indicators will go. And to take one of Judy Lee's points, if you raise up topics to us that pertain to these indicators or other things, we certainly will look at them seriously as possible study topics for us. So wanted to share all that. And of course, this webinar will be made public. Thank you all very much. I want to thank Patricia, Mullaney-Loss as well, and also the hardworking team in my office, but also the entire NEA. Thanks, everyone.